By this video, I am going to demonstrate the steps to develop a simple open authentication client application using Spring Security. The prerequisites for the demonstration or to understand the demonstration or the viewer should have basic understanding of core Java, Spring Boot, Maven, and Java IDE. So before getting into open authentication, we need to understand why we move towards open authentication from the age-old username password authentication. The reason is the username password authentication is having lot of vulnerabilities. Number one, the users of the application have started reusing the password across various applications they are using. So in case such user's password is stolen by the hackers or the attackers, the access of this user is compromised on all the application. Also, this kind of authentication is vulnerable because of the user's choice of weak password, which will make the hackers or the web attackers' jobs easy to steal the password. And this kind of authentication is vulnerable to brute force attack, which is a hacking methodology wherein the hackers would follow a trial and error method and will easily find out the password. Also, this methodology is vulnerable to phishing attack. It is a cyber attack via a fraudulent communication to the user to his email, and when the user clicks on the link, all his sensitive information would be stolen by the hacker or web attackers. There are few other vulnerabilities also. Discussing on that would be the out of scope of this demonstration. Okay, hence, so as these authentication mechanism has such number of vulnerabilities, we had moved towards open authentication. First, let's understand what is open authentication. Open authentication is a security standard that gives permission to one application called client to access users' data or the service in other server without username and password. Here the client is called as the third-party application which will access user's resource on behalf of user. And here user, by user, it means resource owner, and the application which is hosting the service that the user access or which hold the user's data on a server is called resource server. If not username and password, with what the client will access the service on behalf of the resource owner? It is using the access token. So when the client presents the access token, the service, the resource owner will validate it and give access to the client to access the service. So this kind of granting permission to client to access resource owner's data or service in other server is called delegated authorization. So this can be well understood by a real world example called valet parking. So when a resource owner, that is the owner of the car, goes to a shopping mall, say that that shopping mall has a valet parking support. So the customer's vehicle, that is the resource owner vehicle, would be parked by the person from the shopping mall, okay, to assist the customer or to delight the customer. So the person who is parking the car is called the client, okay, and the car is the resource of the resource owner, right? So the car, the valet park the person who is doing a valet parking, sorry, the person who is doing the valet parking has been given access to drive the car by handing over the key from the resource owner to that person who is called as the client. So you can visualize that key as a token to access the service, okay. So the access to the token is very limited until the car is parked. So that is the advantage of this open authentication. Okay, so given that with a real world example, now we will be able to easily connect the OAuth terminologies, starting with resource owner. So a resource owner is the owner of the service hosted in the resource server, and client. So the client is an application which is accessing the service hosted on the resource owner on behalf of the, I'm sorry, I'll repeat it. The client is an application which is accessing a service hosted on the resource server on behalf of resource owner. Authorization server. So authorization server authorizes client to access the resource on behalf of the user by issuing a token and scope limits. Resource server, of course, it's quite self-explanatory. It is the server which hosts the service accessed by the client on behalf of resource owner. Redirect URI. It is the URL to redirect the resource owner host granting permission to the client. It is also called callback URL. Response type. So the response type is a parameter that will state that the client, what the client expects. So it is in OAuth world, the response type value would be always code, which means authorization code. Scope. The scope is a granular permission given to the client to access the data or service hosted on the resource server. It can be granular, maybe just reading user profile or reading user context, or might be performing an action like creating a contact or updating a contact, like that. So it will be granular. Either one of the client would be given access only to read user profile, and maybe another client application would be given access to read user contacts, and some other application to do update the contact or create contacts. So that is the scope of permission granted to the client. Consent. So the scope of permission given to the client was under the consent of the resource owner. So the consent is taken by the authorization server after the authentication is successful. Client ID. So this authorization server which authenticates the resource owner and which issues access token to the client to access some resource on the resource server on behalf of the resource owner has to be registered on the authorization server. So the authorization server should be aware that which client is accessing the resource. So after the registration, that is after the registration of Open Authentication client on the authorization server, we'll be given with two things. One is client ID and the other one is client secret. Okay. Authorization code. Authorization code is the code that client sends to authorization server and get access token in exchange of it from the authorization server. Access token. The access token is used by client to communicate with the resource server to perform any actions on the resource server on behalf of the resource owner. Certain terms I would have repeated because only then we would be getting a good grasp of this open authentication. Okay. So continuing the presentation. So this slide explains the flow of the open authentication. Okay. So say that there is a client application which is hosted on some server and the resource owner is hitting the client URL on the browser. So that is the step number 1. So step number 2, the client will send a redirect request, that is an HTTP status code of 302, wherein the client sends the URL to be redirected on the response header. So as soon as the request reaches back to the resource owner, I mean the browser will pick up the redirect URL on the response header and it will be redirected to the authorization server. So here the redirect URL sent is the URL of the authorization server. So that is the step number 3. And while sending the redirection to authorization server, the information such as response type, client ID, scope, and redirect URI, that is the callback URI, that would be sent to the authorization server. Now, step number 4, the authorization server looks for any existing user session. If one doesn't exist, it will prompt the user to enter the username and password. So that is step number 4. And step number 5, the resource owner enter the username and password and submit it to the authorization server. Step number 6, the authorization server will prompt with the scope acceptance dialog. This will give the list of scopes that the user is in consent to delegate that to the client. So that is step number 6. So step number 7, if a user agrees with that scope, the user will be clicking on yes, saying it means I agree to give this scope of access to the client. So that is step number 7, the resource owner accepting the scope. So authorization server on receiving this request will send a request back to resource owner with a redirect callback URI and temporary authorization code. And step number 9, the resource owner sends back this request to client. I mean, why it is going to client in step number 9? Because the redirect callback URL is to the client. So it comes back to the client. with the authorization code. Step number 10, the client sends this authorization code to the authorization server along with client ID and secret. Authorization server will validate this and then send across the access token to the client. So step number 12 and the last step, the client will use this access token to request for access to a service on the resource server on behalf of the resource owner. So that is step number 12. Okay, let's set up this project on Eclipse. So hit this URL, select the language as Java, and build tool as Maven, because I am using Maven. If you guys are comfortable in using Gradle, of course, can be used. And Spring Boot version 2.7.7. This is the version I am comfortable with. Enter the group name, artifact name, and the name, descriptions, etc. Packaging as jar and Java version. I have Java 11 version installed on my machine, hence I am selecting 11. And click on add dependencies. Select Spring Web, and then time leaf template engine, and then OAuth client. Okay, so these are the dependencies which has to be added, and then you have to click on generate. This will generate a zip file with all these dependencies added on a POM file. So the next step would be import that file by clicking on file, import, click on existing Maven project, browse to the location where you have placed the unzipped project. I had already placed it. So this is the application name. This warning is because I had already imported it. So you cancel. So this is the application which I have exported, Spring Open Authentication. So let me show the POM file. So as I was showing, Timeleaf template engine, Spring Web, and OAuth client. All these dependencies are added as expected. Okay, and these are the templates I have written: homepage, hello, and greetings. So the homepage will just have an button, and then if you click on it, a greeting message will be given after reading the user information. And greetings.html will just read that attribute set after the home page, after the user clicks on the submit button. Okay, and hello page is also the same page which will say, or which will greet the user. Okay, so let's go on to security configuration. So here we had permitted the URL /home/error and /logout without any authentication, and the URLs hello and greetings are restricted with open authentication. Okay, and MVC configurer just to create a view name for /home and a controller class like to greet the user there by reading the user attribute information with the authentication principle. So this object is auto wired. This OAuth to user, which is called as principal, uh, is an object auto wired by the Spring Security after the authentication process is complete. So this will have the user information, and under that we are reading the attribute called name to display it on the response page, which is the hello.html. So I'm adding this attribute called name, which is read over the greetings page and hello page, dollar of name. Okay. And now this one I have told about this, and this is the starting point of the application, which everybody knows. Okay. And when I run this application, the embedded Tomcat would be getting started, and we are good to do our demonstration, and the client application would be started running. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. Yeah, so all this has been explained in this. Okay, now registration of our open authentication client with GitHub. Follow the steps given in this link, and on the page or on the registration page, enter the app homepage as this one and callback URL as this one. So note that this ends with GitHub, and then click register. Then you would be given with the client ID and client secret, which has to be configured in the application.yaml. The application.yaml will be in SRC main resources. I'm not showing that in the GitHub because I don't want to expose my secret. I mean the client secret. So next is registration of our open authentication client with Google authentication system. So click on this link to register. On the registration page, enter the app home page as this, and the callback URL is this. This is different from the one which we did it for GitHub. See, you can see it is ending with /Google. Okay, and again, we will get a client ID and client secret, which has to be configured like this as below. And Spring Security allows us to configure both in one application.yaml. And the beauty of the Spring Security is once it finds that two authentication systems are configured, it automatically provides us with a page with the links to these two authentication systems, namely GitHub and Google, which I will demonstrate. So let's check now whether the server is running, but I will get it stopped and I'll get them cleared. Okay, now let me start that OAuth open authentication application. Okay, it is started. Now let me open a new incognito window and also function F12. This is to track the HTTP request. How is it going on? So now let's land on the home page. So this home page is not showing, it's not redirected to open authentication because on the security config, this home page is marked as permit all and no authentication is required. Only the hello and greetings are restricted, and it requires a open authentication. Coming back to the demo. So this is just hit to home page and the status code is 200 and a web page is presented to the. So let me click on this. So once we click, so the request actually goes to greetings page. See here, greetings page, but this greetings page is redirecting that request to this page, that is the login page. So this is the default page provided by the Spring security by seeing our configuration that we had configured two authentication systems, GitHub and Google. So it will give us these two links. So that is this login. So, and okay, and these are all the CSS files which has got loaded from the server. So let me click on GitHub. Okay, so now you can clearly see what all has happened. So once I clicked on the GitHub, what happened is, so this is the GitHub link and you can see the initiator section. So this is what, okay. So first thing is we are redirected to this authorization by GitHub. Okay, and then it goes to GitHub login and see here the client ID and then the return page it is given here. Okay, so here actually what has happened is, so we have sent this. I think I should explain with the presentation to make clear the flow diagram. So we are on step 3. So the resource owner has been redirected to authorization server with response type. I can show the response type, the payload, response type, client ID. So the client ID is the ID which we received after registering our Open Authentication client in GitHub. The scope is read user. As I said earlier, this is the scoped access. Okay, and redirect URI is this one. So this is the URI which we have configured while registering our client on the. So if you see here, this is the URL. So this is the URL which we configured as a callback URL. So I'm sorry. So we send all this and let me come back to this. Yeah. So client ID, scope, state and redirect URI. Okay, all these informations are sent. And if you see the response type value is code, which means authorization code. It is the response type that the I will show on the. So it is a response type that the client expects from the authentication server. Okay, so let me now supply my username here. So we have been greeted by reading the user profile information. So if you see here, or you can see the initiator. No, I think, yeah. So this is the code which we got. And in exchange of it, we have got the payload. We have got the access token. So greetings page. So actually the page will reach here to this controller. Okay, this is a greetings page. You can check it is a greetings page. So when it reaches the greetings page, we'll be getting the OAuth to user principal object, which is auto void by Spring Security. And from that object, I had read the attribute called the name. So now let me show that on the server console. So it would be quite easy to keep it like this. It's better. So first what we did is we hit on the home page. Okay, this is the home page, and then we had given the submit button, which directed us to the greetings page. So what this greetings page is doing, it is redirecting us to this one. So from the greetings page, we have been redirected to login. Still, we haven't landed on greetings page. Before that, a redirection has happened to login. Okay. So now after in the login button, after we clicked on GitHub. Okay. So there is a GET request which has gone to this GitHub, and then this is still the request. So this line still the request was with our client application. That is the application which I am demonstrating now. So after getting this request, the client is redirecting the resource owner to authorization server. So that is this. So redirecting to this. So again, so when it is doing, the client is sending the response type, client ID, and the scope, right? So now after the authentication, after the user submits the username and password, okay, and scope acceptance. Of course, the scope acceptance is not shown here. It's a limited access, but usually a scope grant page would be given, and user has to accept it, or the scope consent. Okay, and now what happens is an authorization code is received now. So the client requested for response type equal to code, and the client has got it from the GitHub. See, code equal to this. So this code is the authorization code. Now the client uses this code to get a token from the authorization server. So like see here, you got with the token, which is the principal, which is auto-void by Spring Security, and the attribute which I have read is the name. I'll get that show. Yeah. So this is the attribute we had read. Ashok V. So name is the attribute name, and the value is Ashok V. So you can see that. So on the controller, what I am saying, principal dot get attribute of name, so which will return back as Ashok V, and that is stored in the name. And this is the greetings. So we are sending to the view name called greetings. So it will go to greetings.html. So we are stored in the name in name attribute. So now we are reading that in the page, and that is being shown on the response page. Okay, now I'm closing this, and I am doing a Google authentication. So open a new incognito window. Again, land on the home page, which is not authenticated because it is not configured. So now I'll click on this. Our client would be redirecting us to this page. This is a default page given by Spring Security, which is not designed by us. So now I'm going to click on Google. It goes to the sign in page. So I supply my email address. I give next. I'll supply my password. So it will ask for a two-step verification, and then now I'm greeted. So we are back to our greetings page with a greeting. Okay, now let me show that on the server console. Okay, so let me show it quickly. So this is the page. Yeah, let's see. This is the home page. Okay, and then the home page, after we click on the submit button, if you see, it is going to greetings page, because I'll show you on the home page. Okay, so what we are doing, we are clicking on the link. That link is directed to the greetings link. Okay, so that is this greetings, but as the greetings is secured, is configured to be secured. So see, it needs to be open authenticated. As it is configured this way, you can see on the server, it redirects to the greetings page. It redirects to login page. From the greetings page, see, this is the greetings page which we have been directed after clicking on the link. So now we have been redirected to the login page, so which will present that page with two links, Google and GitHub. So we have clicked on Google, and if you see here, once we are redirected to authorization server, this is the accounts.google.com, and you will be seeing the response type client, and then client ID. Okay, so that is no, response type and the client ID and the scope. So redirect URL. Okay, so now let's see. Now it goes to so let's say that it's been authenticated. Okay, now we have been authenticated, and then we'll be given with the token. See here, OAuth 2 authentication token, and which will have the principal name and all. And let's see the name attribute. So the name attribute is Ashok Vijay Kumar, and which is the one which we have been created. So we have created a simple OAuth client application with two authentication systems, namely GitHub and Google. I hope this demonstration would be more helpful for the beginners who want to create a open authentication client application. If you like this video, please give me likes, and then if you have any comments, please do send it to me, so that I can enhance my demonstration to a better and then to the best. Thank you.